The bloodiest maniac of the 20th century, who killed about 300 women, is Pedro Alonso López, who was nicknamed the Monster of the Andes. He was caught in 1980 and convicted of 53 murders committed in the territory of Ecuador. López was suspected in more than 50 crimes, but he was not able to prove his involvement in them. He also committed horrific sexual assassinations in Colombia and Peru. Surprisingly, very little is known about the life of López himself. Scant information about him for a long time was carefully collected by forensic scientists, researchers and journalists. Moreover, until now no one knows whether he is alive and where he is at the present time. He was born in 1948 in the town of Santa Isabel, Colombia. In those years there was a long civil war. Against this background, poverty and crime flourished. López's mother was engaged in prostitution in order to somehow earn a piece of bread. In addition to Pedro Alonso, she had 12 more children. Of course, the boy's life was not at all fabulous. Poverty, the absence of any upbringing and education have done their job. Pedro grew up on the street and very early found out about anything but children's amusements. Once, when he was only 8 years old, his mother found him having sex games with his younger sister. Although, according to Pedro, he did not force the girl at all, he was severely beaten and kicked out of the house. Pedro López became a beggar and for some time wandered through the dirty doorways in search of at least some food. One day a stranger approached him and offered him shelter and food. By that time, Pedro was so hungry that the mere mention of a hearty lunch could have made him go anywhere. Unfortunately, the new acquaintance of López was a pedophile. He led the boy to an abandoned building and raped him for several days. Sometimes his friends, who paid money for pleasure, joined the pervert. This nightmare lasted for several months, until one day Pedro managed to escape from captivity. He retired to Bogotá, where he joined the ranks of the poor, lived, searching at night garbage containers in need of food. After a few months, the boy settled down and began to beg for alms, and quite successfully, he caused everyone's pity. Tourists who came to Bogotá especially sympathized with him. Then one day a boy met an American couple who brought him home and set up a school for orphans. It would seem that now the life of Pedro Alonso was supposed to improve. But when he was 12 years old, one of the school teachers began to harass him. Instead of reporting this to the police, López chose to run away, taking with him all the money from the school box office. Up to the age of majority he wandered, interrupted by petty thefts and regular car thefts. A few years later, López and his friends sought out the very same pedophile who mocked him as a child, and cruelly avenged. For several days the friends mocked their victim in every way, forcing them to perform the most sophisticated sexual whims. After that, they tore off the skin of a pedophile and only then killed him. In the same way, the lives of 3 more men who raped Pedro Alonso when he was a little boy ended. After these brutal murders, López did not think to hide. He continued to steal cars and soon went to jail. The investigation revealed his involvement in the killing of pedophiles. The court, finding that the psychological trauma inflicted on him as a child somewhat justifies his actions, issued a rather mild sentence. For hijacking a car and killing 4 people, Pedro Alonso received 8 years in prison. However, López did not manage to hide his past from his cellmates for a long time. Soon afterwards, rumors began to circulate in the prison that Pedro Alonso had a rich homosexual experience, and the children's nightmare returned. But now López was no longer a little boy in the prison toilet. He waylaid his offenders and, despite the fact that there were 4 of them, he was able to mercilessly deal with them. As a result, 3 of them were killed, another finished his life in a wheelchair. However, the authorities considered López's actions as self-defense, therefore they added only 2 years to his term. In prison, Pedro Alonso had plenty of time to rethink his life. Strangely enough, he came to the conclusion that his mother was to blame for all his misadventures. In the 10 years that López spent behind bars, his hatred of his mother transformed into hatred of all women, without exception. He was released from prison as a completely different person. Pedro moved to Peru, where he began a real hunt for young peasant women, dragging them away from the villages, raping them, then killing them, always buried their bodies in the same place. Later López told the police that by 1978 there were already about 100 victims on his horrible list. However, soon the killer had to flee Peru, as they were seriously interested in local criminal clans, who didn't like someone to steal girls on their territory. López went first to Colombia, and then to Ecuador. It is noteworthy that he had a kind of taboo not to kill Colombians. And the next victims were residents of Ecuador. During this period, he killed about 3 girls a week. It was then that López began to hunt little girls. The age range of his victims was very wide, from 7 to 18 years. Only in 1980 could they arrest López in Ecuador. One of his victims managed to escape from the hands of a maniac and escape, and a few days later she announced the incident to the police, providing a detailed description of the offender. Soon after López came. He did not deny his guilt, on the contrary, began to actively talk about the atrocities committed, which he considered exploits. According to some information, he directly declared to the investigators, "I killed 300 pieces of these whores." At first, the police simply did not believe López, so he began to give more detailed testimony indicating the places of commission of crimes and graves in which he hid the bodies of his victims. It turned out that the maniac has his own cemetery, where the bodies of most of the girls killed by him were buried. According to López, he lured the girls to abandoned houses under the pretext that he wanted to give them a gift. Then he raped them for a long time in many ways, and then killed them. In this case, the offender never deprived the girls of life in the dark, preferring to see the eyes of their victims at the time of the murder. Sometimes he mocked the corpses for some time before sending them to the mass grave. During one of the investigative experiments, the remains of 50 bodies were discovered. All of South America was shocked by police reports. Each new message horrified people. Dr. Rothman Rios, a medical specialist who worked with the maniac, recalled, "He remembered everything, the days, the hours, the clothes, the names, the features of the girls. He has an incredible memory. He did not feel anything, no remorse, no guilt, nothing." Finally, López's case went to court. It turned out to be a remarkable fact: the maximum possible punishment for any, even the most serious, crime in Ecuador was only 20 years in prison. The killer received this maximum period. But what was his fate, is not known for certain. According to one version, after serving 16 years in a prison in Ecuador, López was transferred to a special clinic in Colombia. This indulgence was made to him for exemplary behavior and active cooperation with the investigation. He spent the remaining 4 years. According to other sources, from Ecuador he was sent to Peru, where the death penalty was practiced. According to some reports, López was sentenced to death and executed. However, there is no official confirmation of this version. Many in Latin America are convinced that in the late 1990s, Pedro López was quietly released from prison. He still lives and continues to kill. It is said that he is either in Ecuador, or in the United States.